Alrighty. Hello there, guys. How's it going? It's Wazoo here, and I'm just going to be doing a quick ranking of all the units in Rush Royale for the most recent version, which currently includes 54 characters, them all right here. I think it's 11.0 now. I could be wrong. I don't know exactly. But anyways, let's just hop right into it. I'm going to start with the commons first, then the rares, then the epics, and then the legendaries. Pretty basic enough. Anyways, let's first start with the Archer. Now, the Archer is actually, in my opinion, one of the better early starting cards, as it's pretty much just a downgraded version of Boris and the Wind Archer, which I'll get into later. But essentially, it's a very fast shooting unit. The more you mana upgrade it, so like go from level 1 to 5, so the more you mana upgrade it, the faster it shoots, and also it increases the amount of damage it does as well, which is just crazy overall. As well as the simple merging upgrade also increases the amount of damage it does, which I think overall is just makes a very well-rounded unit that could be used in the end game. However, most likely you will get its replacements later on, and therefore it becomes inferior, but it is well-rounded and very good unit, so I'd actually rate it as a B. Now, the Bombardier. For those who have played early game, mid game, and late game being like more in the 5,000 trophy range, mid being around 2,500 to 4,000, and early being obviously before then. As soon as you get the card though, you immediately notice a complete difference in how you go about playing the game because of the fact that it can stun. The ability to stun is only held by, I think, 2, maybe 3. I could be wrong, but I know for certain 2 cards in the game, which is the Bombardier and the Catapult. I think third might be Robot, but that's not important now. Just the ability to stun, though, is one of the most broken abilities that any card can have, as it completely stops whatever unit it hits from doing anything, including bosses, which means you can survive horrible bosses like Bedlam, Puppeteer, and Tribunal from really doing anything to your group, which for late game builds is a miracle and a half. So obviously, right then and there, deserves an A. The reason I'm not putting it in S is because if left alone, if it's just that unit, it's not doing anything else besides stunning. But its ability to stun and how well it does at stunning puts it at A. Secondly, the Ice Mage. The Ice Mage, I'll go into more detail later, but right now, it's pretty much just a simple freeze. Its talents do make it much more advantageous in the sense that it can freeze much better and even freeze your opponent, which, is almost as annoying as freaking Shaman, but I'll get to that later. But being able to freeze your opponent at later talents and higher levels makes it also more viable. But initially, just as the playing card, which for future notices, I won't be using talents. I'll mention them, but I won't include them in the rating of the cards, because obviously it drastically changes how good that card is. And because of how difficult it is to get fraction cores and stuff, or faction cores, I'm just not going to include talents because not everybody has access to them. But anyways, point being, Ice Wizard, I would say it's also B because of its ability to freeze and how well that enables you to kill all the enemies on time before they obviously, kill you. So I say the Ice Wizard's pretty good at doing its job. There is obviously an upgraded version of it, but the Ice Wizard does its job great. Next, we have the Fire Wizard. Literally haven't touched it since the first 5 games. Literally, as soon as I got the Hunter, it was out of my deck. It does do area damage. It's just not... Like, there's so many other area damage dealers that you find after, like, I think Arena 4, that it's not even worth it. Even the Lightning Wizard, which I'll get into next, does a better job. Which I would put the Lightning Wizard at C. And the reason why I put the Lightning Wizard at C is because though it does a better job, it has diminishing returns on its area of effect because it hits 3 enemies. dealing lightning damage. And that lightning damage does more than its initial hit, but it goes down from 100% to then 70% and then 30%. So that means it's only really doing actual damage to the first two, and then it's like tickling the third, which who wants it to be, only tickling the enemy? Freaking making them laugh, and that's not good. So that's why I'm putting it at C, because it is useful, and I have used it in a few decks, and that helped me push to later arenas. But as soon as I got a better substitute, I switched it out immediately. I didn't even consider it. And yeah, so next we have the Hunter. Now the Hunter I would put at B tier, not because it doesn't show potential of an A or an S tier. It's just because of its one drawback, and that's the fact that it's random targeting. The Hunter has one of the most annoying targeting systems in this game, which is random targeting, which a lot of units do have, which you need to be careful of. But essentially, what random targeting means is that it just shoots whatever it wants. And it will switch between targets. And so if it kills maybe one thing in the very front, it will then aim for the guy at the very back, not doing any damage to the ones in front. And therefore, those ones in front will be able to kill you without even question. That's the Hunter's only drawback. However, the Hunter's first shot at a target deals increased damage as well, and it allows for it to do a ton of damage early game. And so if you're looking for a deck that focuses only on the early game of the matches, it is incredibly good at that. Late game, it's questionable because as soon as you get like more than 6 or 7 minions on your field, the Hunter becomes almost useless. So that's its only drawback. However, it is great at dealing damage, and really that's its main point. Its talents, I do know, make it much better, in fact. Also once again making it absolute hell for your opponents, just because it can spawn another minion on their side. I'm pretty sure a wild boar at max level, but I'm not going to consider that, just going to consider the base card. Next we have the Poison Dart Shooter. It's in D, so obviously I'm not a huge fan of it. Once again, this was another card. This card I actually removed first before the Fire Wizard, so but once again, I would still give it like a decent rating. Its damage is decent. Its attack rate, though, is pretty poor, honestly. And its venom damage is also pretty much the same as its attack rate, and it doesn't like stack, so once it hits, it just stays that way. And then it does venom damage, but it doesn't stack. So it's unfortunate. And it doesn't really get any better. And there's also an upgraded version of this that also does area damage in the epics, which is Ivy, and I'll get to that later. Okay, lastly, second to last of the commons, we have the Rogue. The Rogue is arguably, in my opinion, I'd actually put it... See, the Rogue I'm actually kind of mixed on, because with the Rogue, it does high amounts of damage at a very good fire rate, and it also targets first. However, when I've used it, there's been it's been mixed results. Sometimes it's been much better than the Hunter, and honestly almost A tier, and other times the Hunter's been better. The only reason why I think I'm going to leave it in B tier, actually, you know what? Because I'm just doing base cards, so not considering the talents, I would say Rogue is a bit better than Hunter, due to the fact that Rogue can end up actually hitting higher damage numbers, since its base damage is also affected by your crit damage, and the higher your crit damage gets, like for instance, I'm currently at 1,350%, that means my damage on average gets an extra like 600 to 700 damage added to its base of 130 for me. I have a level 9 currently. So just from that alone, it's already doing way more damage than the Hunter, and it's also hitting first, which means that it makes sure it prioritizes the first enemies and kills them and gets them out of the way. And I think that overall is a better ability than the Hunter. Therefore, I'm going to put it in A, because I also think it's a great, viable, just damage-dealing target as well. And if it crits on top of its extra crit damage, it's dealing a ton of damage. So you can tell I like the Rogue. Next, we have the thrower. I'm going to rate the thrower as a C because I just think of it as a worse hunter. That's pretty much it. It's just a worse hunter. And it doesn't even have talents to show. So, okay, and that's pretty much the commons. And next, moving on to the rares. So, first of all, we're going to start with the Alchemist. Now, the Alchemist is, lack of better terms, a built different poison dart shooter, in the sense that it has the same effect where it kind of leaves a poison, but instead it leaves it as a trap on the field, and that venom damage does much more damage. However, it does a significantly higher, or it doesn't do it. It has a significantly higher fire rate. No, lower would be the right term, right? It shoots really slow, essentially, is what I'm trying to say. And it triggers at level 9. It triggers every 4.88 seconds is when it throws this potion. You can upgrade it by merging, and that significantly reduces its time to throw the traps and quite greatly increases how much damage it actually does. But it overall just is outclassed by so many other characters, and it honestly feels like a burden. Just because you also have to wait for the enemy to walk over the trap, so it could take forever to get to like the other side right before it's about to enter, and then it dies. So I don't think it's worth it. And there's many other cards you could use besides it. Next, we have the banner. Now the banner I'd actually put as a B because it's a great way to boost kind of your speed of your units, which can be more crucial for slow but heavy hitting units. Those units being stuff like, for example, the hunter, the rogue. You could also use this on the sharpshooter, which we'll get to soon, but yeah. Next, we have the Mana Cauldron. Now, the Mana Cauldron, also have to say, I'm kind of torn between it being, if it was like talents included, it'd probably be up in the A. However, since I'm not including talents, I'd probably have to say it's down in the C. And the reason why it's such a drastic difference is because once you employ the talents into the Mana Cauldron, it adds a lot of on-field buffs, which makes it almost equivalent to a buffing tower. And that bonus is pretty immense. Now, the reason why I put it at C is because for those who have used it, you'll notice it does produce a lot of mana if you have a lot on the field. And if you're able to afford a lot on the field in like the early game, so like the early match, in the early part of the match, then yeah, that's great. You're getting a ton of mana, you're not losing anything, and then you can start prepping for later rounds. But if you get a bunch of these late game, it hurts a lot. So for that reason, I'm going to put it as a C. It is a bit harsh, so I'm going to put it up in the top C because it's like borderline. Will it let me? There we go. It is borderline between B and C, but I'm just going to put it in C because I personally don't like to use it. Yeah, so on to the next one. We have the Chemist. Now, the Chemist, I got to say, is borderline between B and A, but for just the fact that there are other cards that can also kind of serve a similar purpose, I'm going to put it at... Actually, I think it is better at doing its thing, so I'm going to say A. I'm going to say A. I'm going to do a low A, though, so he'll probably be at the end of the A tier. And the reason why is because... I would just say it's a toss-up because I do like to use the other one that debuffs, Trapper. I do like to use Trapper every now and then, but I gotta say that Alchemist overall, when it comes to serving its purpose, it does a great job at doing that. I should probably explain what that purpose is. That is to destroy the defense of the enemies. And essentially what that allows you to do is if you fully max out the Alchemist at a level 10 Alchemist, if you fully merge it, which is possible in later, like in the late game, like so once you get more in like the 5,000, 6,000 trophy area, it's able to do an 85% damage reduction. Now, obviously, that's if it's also at max tier up, but you'll most likely get it to tier 3. So merge tier 3, and you'll level up so you'll get to the max level on the mana, mana power up, and that will give you still a 60% armor destruction, which is still a great amount of damage increase. And I think it does great at that, and also it just greatly increases your damage overall. So it's a great card overall, and I like it. Next, we have the Grindstone. The Grindstone also belongs in the B tier, as it pretty much just serves the same function as the banner, but it buffs crit rate instead of speed. And because it buffs crit rate, I'm going to then put it in front of the banner because it's just better of the buffing tools. But since it doesn't do any damage, I'm going to keep it below all the damage dealers. Now, next, I'm going to use the Priestess. So the Priestess, on all things, I would say is mid B, because it's great at producing mana. However, that's its only purpose, is to produce mana. It does do enough damage so that if you get a few of them on the board early game, you'll be fine. You'll survive, and you can then merge them together and hopefully get whatever you need. But if you're left with like a tier 4 late game, that's one tier 4 that could have been something else that would have done a lot more damage if it was something else. And because of that, I'm going to leave it in mid B. But it is great at producing mana, and its talents are also great, especially with the Gift from the Heavens, and just its max fully thing. Receiving mana from the Priestess increases the attack speed of units on the field for 15 seconds, which is just a great buff overall. But once again, that's its talents, and I'm only worried about the main unit itself, which I say is a B. Now, we got the Sentry. Now, the Sentry I'm also going to put in the A tier. And since we've gone this far in the distance, I'm not going to put anything really in the S tier, or there will be a few. Most of the S tiers will be the legendaries. There will be a few. There will be like a few. What's it called? S tiers that will be epics, but almost none of the rares will be an S tier, in my opinion. But the Sentry, however, I would say is an A tier card, and the reason being is just because of the sheer amount of damage it does. It's pretty much an upgraded hunter. It's a better rogue. It's a better rogue, I should say. I'll rearrange it like that. It's a better rogue in the sense that it also does a ton of damage, but its damage is definite, and it gradually deals more damage as it attacks. And it's not per unit, it's just as it attacks. So that means it'll eventually just start doing as much damage as the rogue at a faster attack interval. Is it a faster? I'm pretty sure it's a faster attack. No, it's a slightly slower, but it's more guaranteed damage at a faster attack interval, and it's a more steady damage as well. So you can't get unlucky with your damage like how you can with rogue. And so that's why I think the Sentry is great. It also targets first, which we love. And yeah, I that's why I think it's one of the better, more certain cards. It's just great at dealing damage. Next, we have the Sharpshooter. Now, the Sharpshooter I'm going to place right next to the Hunter, as it pretty much serves the same purpose, but it has a bit of a different attack function, which can be better sometimes, but it also can be worse. And now I think about it, I'm actually going to place it below because most of the times it is more worse. And what it does is it focuses on the enemy who is closest to max health. Not has the most health, just closest to max health. Which means that it won't even stick on the enemy. Like if it's focusing on the mini boss and then the mini boss gets below the health of another minion, it will then switch. No, it's just worried about percentage wise the current health of that minion over the max health of that minion. Whichever percentage is the highest, it will then target to that, which is a pain in the keister, and it's not worth my time. And so, however, it does once again deal a great amount of damage, especially during boss waves where it has just a sheer amount of increase, but because of its weird targeting mechanic, I'm going to keep it at a B. Now we have Zealot. The Zealot is, I would put in front of the Hunter, and that is because the Zealot does, once again, a lot of damage, and it does almost as much damage as the Rogue. But that's only if you're not using your mana, which means it's only effective, like really effective, late game. I've tried to build a few decks with it. I haven't been super successful with it, but I have gotten decently good results to enough to where I think I could speak on it. But I would say it's probably more like a worse Rogue, so I probably have to keep it. I'm going to kind of try to organize this. There we go. That's a bit better of a term, but I'd say it's more like just a worse Rogue in the sense that instead of just betting on your crit damage to do more damage, it's betting on the fact that you don't use your resources, which means that it's paired great with stuff that produces a lot of mana, like the Priestess and the Mana Cauldron, but it's also just a pain to use those as well because those aren't doing any damage. So that's my opinion on that. And that's it for the rares. Now on to the epics. So let's first start with Catapult. Now Catapult I would also put at a B tier, and I'd probably put it in front of the Zealots. And the reason being is because the Catapult is amazing early game. You can just have one on the field and you are clearing every single minion, no problem, which means you can focus on the rest of your board for setup later on. However, the problem with this is that you can't like effectively use it late game because its attack speed is just so slow, and the amount of damage it does for that attack speed doesn't insta kill like how it used to in the early game of the match. It's like in the early game of the match, it insta-kills everything it hits, which is why it's so good and why we can accept the fact that it shoots slow. But because it doesn't really speed up that much, it actually doesn't speed up at all when you merge it together. But essentially, because of that, because it's so slow, we can't really use it late game, so I'm going to put it at B. Now the Crystalmancer, I would actually put at an A, because it's just overall great at dealing damage. The more it hits something, the more its damage increase. So in order to really make it shine, you want to place it with speed increasing buffs. It's like attack speed increasing buffs, which there's a lot of in the game actually. And because of that, it's very easy to make it do a lot of damage very quickly. And because of that, I think it deserves A, but more on the low A spectrum, just because of the fact that it takes a second before it's doing its max damage. But to read you kind of its definition, after 30 hits, its damage is triple. And after 90 hits, its damage is quintupled, so 5 times as much as it used to be. And I think just due to the fact that it takes 30 and then 90 hits to reach those levels of damage is why it's not as good as it could be, but it is up there. Okay, so this is actually going to be our first S tier, and that's going to be the Engineer. Engineer is a really, really early game unit that you can get, and if you've used it at all, you'll realize that it's pretty good once you get multiple of them together. From what I've found when using the Engineer, is that once you get it to about 6, a total of 6 is when you get the gears themselves kind of bright red and turning, and that's usually 6 is around when it starts to be really, really good. If you can get 6 connected together, that's when the Engineers really start to pop off in best terms. And furthermore, so I'm not going to include its talents, but its talents put it almost as one of the best single target DPS if you build the board right. If you can get as many Engineers on the board as possible, and you have it at max level 15 talents, it is doing ludicrous amounts of damage. It is absolutely unreal. And because of that, that would make it like double S tier. But since I'm just going to do the base unit, I'm going to keep it at S tier, just because of the sheer amount of damage it does, how quick it attacks, and the fact that it increases damage when they're all collected together, and the more you add, the better it gets. Just that overall thing makes it worthy. So, onto the Gargoyle. Now, the Gargoyle, I would actually put below the sharpshooters and stuff like that, and that's because though it has the possibility to deal massive amounts of damage, it just really doesn't hold up to what the rest of the other cards can actually do. And the reason being is because if you're dealing with even merge of that card, the card does nothing. It does nothing except buff nearby gargoyles, which makes it even more difficult to have to like deal with placements and stuff like that. And you have to make sure that your gargoyles don't get de-leveled by shaman or de-leveled by tribunal, or if you're in co-op, get leveled up by your opponent's shaman or something like that. And because of that finicky balance between the right levels and stuff like that, it makes it ridiculously hard, way too hard for I think what it's trying to accomplish, to actually make it usable. It's the only way I really see fixing this card would be if you could toggle it, but I don't think that'd be too much effort to try and find a way to toggle a card to be in stasis or not stasis, and that would just make it a pain. So I don't really see any resurrection for this card or like revival for this card being good. Maybe if it just said it feels rank 1, it would give the buff. That would probably be overall way better. Or like rank 1 and 2 is when it gives the buff, and then everything above then. But then you can't really use it with Scrapper, or you can't like randomly buff it. So it's in a very middle ground area. So it has the possibility to be good, but it won't really show any promise anytime soon. At least not that I see. On to the next, the Executioner. Now, the Executioner, I'm going to go over really quickly. I'd actually say it's an A tier. And that's because of how much it can actually help some late game builds, or just at least some weak damage dealers that don't really hold up to standard. And essentially what it does is it just kills stuff before it actually dies. So like if it only has 30% health left, it will just automatically kill it, which is a very nice function. It's pretty much an insta-kill, but a guaranteed one, and it basically makes it so that all the monsters' health are only 70% of what they actually are, which, do the quick math, that's reducing a lot of damage that you have to do in order to kill it, and that could be the difference between winning a game and losing a game. But it's just as simple as that. Because of its versatility, I'm going to put it in A. The Mime. No doubt about it, because of its absolute versatility in game, the Mime deserves S tier. So I'm just going to do it right now, along with its brethren, the Harley Quinn. And the reason why is because both of these cards allow you to merge with any other like card. And though they're not good at dealing damage, they don't really provide anything super special besides the fact that they can merge with any card. The Harley Quinn, on the other hand, can transform into any other card and then merge with that card, obviously, because it'll be the same rank. And so because of that extra versatility, Harley Quinn is by far much more versatile than Mime, so I'll put more stuff in between Harley Quinn and the Mime, just because of the sheer difference in like their jobs and what they do. But the reason why their versatility is so great is because they also can help you. The Harley Quinn can help you get rid of stuff you don't want and add more of the stuff you want. And the Mime just helps you get rid of stuff you don't want by merging them together. Sometimes you get unlucky and you get the same exact character again, but it, for the most part, usually gets rid of what you don't want, and then it helps you refill your board with what you do want. One downside, though, for Harley Quinn is that when you merge and create the same, so like it copies basically whatever card you have of the same rank on board, it gives that copy roughly about a 33% decrease in damage, which for like a quick kind of rough idea of how much that affects the damage of the unit, that still makes a tier 2 do more damage than the tier 1 merge. However, a tier 3 merge now does pretty much the same damage as a tier 2 merge. And a tier 4 merge is now worse than a normal tier 3 merge with the debuff. This is with the debuff. Okay. So a tier 4 with the debuff does less damage than a tier 3 without the debuff. But it still does more damage than a tier 2 without the debuff. So it's definitely diminishing returns I think would be the best way to describe it, but it still lets you put those activations on the field, and I think it's very worth it. Okay, anyways, continuing on. Wind Archer. It's very self-explanatory. I've already mentioned this before. It's just a faster shooting archer, and because of that, I'm going to put it up in the A tier. I'm going to put it in front of the sentry, as I believe it does more damage. I should put this here. I'm going to put more utility kind of back in the back. Damage dealers like this. Yeah, there you go. Utility, just kind of utility-wise. Damage dealers are always going to be prioritized because they can actually kill the enemy. But, yeah. Now we got utility. So, I'm going to put the Portal Keeper in C. And that's because in PvP, trying to grind ranks and stuff like that, it's pretty much useless. However, if we're talking about PvE, so if you're doing co-op, it is immensely better and would deserve to be an A because of the fact that it's the only thing that can degrade, or not degrade is not the, it would be more like set back the enemies and teleport them back. It's the only card that can work on every single enemy and set them back and give you more time to actually kill them. However, because of its just overall use, and because PvP isn't like the most important thing in the game, it's more like tournaments and PvP, or sorry, I mean, yeah, co-op isn't the most important thing in the game, and PvP is more important, and because of that, it deserves to be in C, because its just overall usefulness is not that high. Next, we have the, I believe, Rocketeer. Pyrotechnic. Pyrotechnic is his name. And it's interesting how it works. If you're able to get an even number, if you're able to get an odd number of it, its attack speed is reduced, but it attacks random targets and it deals area damage. The area damage that it does is very, very high, and because of that, it makes up for its lack in speed. And it also has, if you get it to like tier 3, it's shooting off a rocket every 0.27 seconds, and that is insanely fast for doing like essentially 400 damage. This is maxed out, by the way, on the mana power. 400 damage every 0.27 seconds in an area damage, which is pretty good. If you have an even number, though, it decreases in its power, arguably. It will target first, though, and it'll just shoot very, very fast, but it won't deal area damage. So it's a kind of toss-up at how you use it, and you could get kind of screwed over, depending on how many you have, but that's essentially the moral of the story. And I would actually put it at a B tier, and definitely in front of the Archer. I don't know if I would put it in front of the Zealots, because I've actually lost to a few goblins every now and then, so I'd say it's pretty up there. So yeah, I just call them goblins because it just looks like a goblin. It's the only goblin in the game, so goblin. Next we have the Reaper. I'm just kind of going in order on my card list here. So next we have the Reaper. Now I'm going to put the Reaper at a high C. And the reason for this is because it does low damage. It targets random, which means it doesn't even kill whatever's about to kill you first. You know, it gets distracted. And it also attacks every 1 second. However, its redeeming quality is the fact that it has a chance to instantly kill something. And if you max it out, so like if you do tier 7 merge and you do level 5 mana power, it attacks every 0.14 seconds and it has a 7.4% chance to kill. But that's at max rank, okay? And if you max it out in the mana power up. Let's just say you get it to tier 3 though. You're still attacking every 0.33 seconds and you still have that same 7.4% chance to instant kill, but once again, it's a 7.4% chance, which is barely in the realm of plausibility that you'll actually insta-kill something. In the actual game, it does do its job every now and then, but from what I've noticed, it isn't really worth using in your deck, and you'd rather use a different damage dealer or just a better area damage dealer, because that's pretty much what the Reaper is. It's just a bad kind of implication of an area damage dealer. Okay, next we have the Vampire. Now the Vampire I'm going to put at a B tier, and the reason being is because it does poor damage and it doesn't attack too fast. But if you get it up, if you get like 2 early game and you just simply level it up to a mana level 3, you start making a ton of mana, and you can keep just 2 around on your board for quite a little while. And let me tell you, it is making you so much mana that you can't really even comprehend, that you don't really even notice it. Like in the very early game, so like during the first boss, it will be making an immense amount of mana. And so yeah, that's really its only carrying it to level B, is because of how much mana it makes, and the fact that it does damage. It's basically the mana pot, but it does damage. It doesn't have any talents though, so that's not really a redeeming factor of it. But yeah, so that's why I put it in B tier, because it doesn't do enough damage to be worth like an A tier and an S tier. And then lastly, we actually have a few more. I skipped over a few, my bad. Okay, we have the Plague Doctor. It's just a better alchemist. There's honestly, it's like a mix between alchemist and Ivy. I'm actually going to explain Ivy first, and then I'll do Ivy. I'd rank as an A tier. Ivy does, so the way Ivy works, it's pretty much the same as, it's a combination of the Plague Doctor and the Poison Dart. So the Plague Doctor, what it does is it basically will stab an enemy and it'll do damage every now and then, but when that enemy dies, it leaves behind a poison cloud that will damage any enemies who walk through it, and that's where it does most of its damage. But you have to kill that enemy first before it really starts to shine. And because of that, that's why I'm going to put it like at a mid B tier. For the Poison Dart, once again, it just does venom damage, so after you hit an enemy, it will kind of leave it like doing residual damage, so it'd be like a tick damage that it slowly goes down by. Now Ivy, what it does is when an enemy dies, okay, after it gets hit by Ivy, it will leave like a flower, and when the enemy dies, that flower will explode and deal area damage. It won't leave behind a cloud to kill all the other enemies, but it does good amount of area damage, and that actually inflicts on all the other enemies as well. And it'll usually, if you've ever played with Ivy in the very early game, it's very fun and very satisfying to watch 15 enemies all in a row just instantly disappear once Ivy's ability triggers, and that's very fun to watch. And the reason why I put Ivy at A is because Ivy has the potential to do massive amounts of damage, because Ivy's damage does stack, unlike Poison Dart. And because it stacks, that means it can stack up to 40 seeds. And each seed does 30 or 73 damage per tick. The quick math means that at max, it's doing 2,500 damage with all 40 seeds. And if you crit with that, you will pretty much be doing like, I think it's, for me personally, it'd be like 34k out of nowhere, which is quite a good amount of damage for single target. And by the way, it's not just like a slow every 1 second it deals damage. It's like a boom, 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 boom. That's how fast it's doing the damage. And so I think it's pretty great in that. However, its only drawback, and why I'm not putting it in S tier, is that it targets max health just like the Sharpshooter, which is also why I put it at the very end of the A tier, because of the fact that it targets max health, which means it doesn't stay on the same target, which means it can't build those seed stacks as well as I wish it would. But that's probably a nerf, because if it could stack that many seed targets, it'd pretty much just be a better Crystal Mancer. And that leaves with 2 more for the epic range. So we have the Thunderer, I'm pretty sure is the name. Thunderer, yep. And the Thunderer essentially is it's a bit finicky, and because of how finicky it is, I'm gonna put it in B tier. And the reason why I say it's finicky is because it has to be tier 2 or higher to really start doing the area damage it's meant to. It does do pretty good single target damage, doing about roughly, I think, 350 damage per target initially at level 11. And as you mana power it up, it does even more damage in the lightning damage and the initial target damage. However, in order for it to do more lightning damage, in order for it to hit more targets, it has to be a higher tier. When the Thunderer hits around tier 4 or tier 5, it becomes crazy good. It starts dealing so much area damage that you can't really even comprehend it, because it also starts attacking every 0.16 seconds. It will hit 5 enemies, dealing 400 damage every single time, which is a crazy amount of damage. And if it crits, that's even more. And it has a high chance of critting as well. But if it's at like only tier 1 or tier 2, it's only hitting 1 to 2 enemies respectively. And because of that, it's not worth running it in your deck if you have a better option. And in my opinion, a better option would be something like the Bruiser, or I guess the Bruiser is really the only thing I could think of at the moment. But yeah. And lastly, we have the Portal Keeper. Now, the Portal Keeper, I would actually say belongs in A, once again, for its versatility. The reason why this is so important is because many late game builds require the Portal Keeper. I have 5 good decks that I currently have built out. And let's see, I'm going to count. I have 1, 2, 3 decks that require the Portal Keeper out of the 5. And these are all completely different decks. And 3 out of the 5 require the Portal Keeper in order to set it up properly. Furthermore, the Portal Keeper is also a great counter to Shaman, as when you like switch stuff over, it prevents any bad negative effect affecting both the Portal Keeper and whatever unit just switched with. And it prevents all bad effects essentially for like a short period of time, which makes it a perfect counter to Shaman, as if you do the Portal Keeper switch in time, it negates Shaman's bad effect. You do have to switch it back though once you're done if you're in like trying to set up a certain order. It also gets rid of Harley Quinn's debuff when you switch it with Portal Keeper, which is a great thing, which means that you can use Harley Quinn and then remove Harley Quinn's debuff, meaning that it just becomes a normal unit, which is great. And because of that versatility, it's pretty much like you can almost think of it like a healer for your units on board. And because of that, I'm going to put it up at A. It also just sets up and makes it so much easier to use endgame builds. So like if you're trying to put 4 units around like a grindstone or a banner or a knight statue, which I'll talk about later, right here, the knight statue, it just overall is just by far a great card to use and one of my favorite epics. But I'm not going to put an S just because it doesn't have that S tier potential. Okay, next we have the Blade Dancer. The Blade Dancer is S because it's pretty much a better engineer. It's that simple. It's just a better engineer. Shoots extremely fast, does high amounts of damage. When it's combined with the Knight Statue, which I will put up in A right now, when it's combined with the Knight Statue, it just does so much damage that it acts as a splash damage unit as well. And it is absurd to watch, and if you get it set up right, you're pretty much winning most of your games that you play. And yes, nextly, the Knight Statue. The Knight Statue is literally just a combination of the banner and the grindstone. However, it's only a combination when you have both of the not both, when you have an even number. When you have an even number of Knight Statues, that's when it's a grindstone and a banner. And it increases your attack speed by like I think 100% at like a pretty easy achievable range. And then it also, if you if you get it to like I think a level 3, let's just say a tier 3 and a fully maxed out mana power gives you let's see here. So tier 3 and a fully maxed out mana power. Gives you an extra 15% chance to do crit damage. And it gives you an extra 31 plus 45. So I was wrong. So it was about 76% increase. But still, it's overall just amazing buffing tower. However, its only drawback, which is why it's not S tier, is the fact that you need to have an even number of them, which means you can't be free to build whatever you want. Next, we have the... I'm just going to get some of the ones that I don't think are really worth talking about out of the way right now. Clock Power, I'm going to put it in C tier because it's not the worst, because it's very, very effective in co-op. It does an immense increase to the damage of your opponent, or of your teammate, I should say, in co-op, and that's very fun to mess with. As it also, when you merge it together, it just vastly increases the damage your teammate does. But in all other uses, it's complete garbage. It's pretty much the same exact tragedy as Portal Mage. Corsair, I'm going to put at bottom of B, and the reason why is because it does do amazing area damage for the first 2 bosses. But after that, it kind of becomes of a nuisance and doesn't really stay doing the good damage it used to. You can argue that the Naughty Bomb that it throws off every now and then, that deals 3% of the enemy's max health, can be good, but that's only like 5 on the field, and that's only 15%, which you can argue is quite a bit of damage. But I would think that there's a lot of other units that you could use to make sure that your main damage units, like an Engineer or a Blade Dancer, would do more damage. Next, we have the Demon Hunter. Once again, honestly, another tragedy, because it just doesn't do enough damage to keep up with it. Even in the early game, it feels like it's like barely surviving. Like you are holding on by the final hair on somebody's chin. It's like you're barely getting by. And just because of that, it's not really worth using. And I even tested it out in a real game, getting it to tier 7 and hoping that it would do some damage. But its attack speed greatly reduces once you get it to tier 7. And because of that, its ability to insta-kill whatever attacks and do 18% damage to, or 18% max health to whatever it hits, meaning that it only takes 5 hits to really kill a boss. Actually, sorry, it's not. It's 18% of current health, which means it has diminishing returns. And just because of that, I just don't find it really, like, its big grand finale isn't that big and grand. It can be useful in co-op, but even then it's very hard to get by. I just don't think the card's good. If you guys have any better uses of it, go ahead, tell me, let me know. But I just can't see it. The Summoner, so the Summoner is very good. Basically, you merge it together, you get an extra unit. It's like 2 for the price of 1. That's basically the simple description of it. But because of that, it allows for a lot more versatility, and that utility is what I place it at A tier for. That's pretty much it. The Frost, once again, just a better Ice Mage, but I'm going to put it in B tier because it doesn't really have that big of an impact, because you end up hoarding so many minions on your board that when it comes boss time, you end up having twice as much health as your opponent, even if you're at like the same area on the racetrack. So like if you're both at the same like distance, like just say that your opponent had minions to halfway and you had minions to halfway, you're going to be much worse off because you have twice as many minions as your opponent because you slowed them all down. And so because of that, it hurts because you most likely aren't doing enough damage to keep up with it. And it also, you know, there you have it. It's pretty much just a better Ice Mage from what I see it. Once again, not including talents, but just a better Ice Mage. Okay, and I think there's a few more. Ivy is, I would say, top A tier due to its versatility. Or sorry, this Dryad. I would probably actually no, right there for A tier. And the reason why is because Ivy allows you, when you just can merge it with anything of the same tier, and it guarantees that card will just go up a tier. That's it. The reason, actually, now that I think about it, I'm going to put it bottom of A. because if you've ever used Ivy in a deck, your worst fear is that you only get Ivies. Because when you combine Ivies together, it just when you combine Dryads together, it just ranks up that Dryad. And the reason why that's so bad is because Dryad does little to no damage, and because you can't just hope for another random card to pop up. So like you can't, like, let's just say you're running a Blade Dancer, Night Statue, Dryad deck. If you get a bunch of Dryads, you are screwed because you can't combine those Dryads together to get a Blade Dancer, or a Night Statue, or like a Portal Keeper to just do some damage. You just can't. And so it pretty much, if you get really unlucky with whatever deck you use it in, you're screwed. You don't even have a chance. But that's a very rare, like 5% of the time chance. And because of that, I'm still going to keep it at A, but because it's still a 5% chance, that's within the realm of plausibility, I'm going to keep it at A instead of S. Next, we have the Cultist. The Cultist is just a better engineer. It does pretty much, it doesn't do as much damage when it does the same amount of damage as the engineer, unless the engineer has talents. If the engineer has talents, the engineer is just broken out of its mind. But we're not including talents, and so because of that, we're going to have the Cultist in front of the engineer. And the reason why is because the Cultist does area damage. When you have it set up correctly, which is when you have a kind of plus symbol. So you have like a row of 3 and then a row of 3. You know, if you use the Cultist, you'll know what I mean. But if you have a plus symbol on the board with the Cultists, the middle unit in the middle will do area damage and attack extremely fast. And because of that, I put it at S. Now, Bruiser. Bruiser, I would actually say, is a low S tier. And the reason why is because it's pretty much just the go-to. Like, if you are trying to build a very finicky deck and you just need that extra like very reliable damage dealer, Bruiser's the go-to. Because the Bruiser, essentially what it does is, if there are 7 or more minions on the field, and I think every attack it does, it has a 10% chance to enter Rage Mode. And when it enters Rage Mode, its damage skyrockets and it does massive area damage. It's almost has that same satisfying effect as Ivy. The only thing that I could have considered to make it A tier is because it has a cooldown, but that cooldown is almost negligible. And it also has a chance to just never activate. And on that slim chance that it doesn't activate, or it activates way too late, you're pretty much screwed because it doesn't do enough damage, but like when it's not activated. But if you just have like 1 or 2 bruisers out of 5 active, it is doing an immense amount of damage, and it usually clears out most boards and keeps you alive enough for your finicky deck to then take over and start doing its damage. It's also great if you're just doing a good Bedlam, Tribunal, or Puppeteer resistant deck. It's just great overall if it's just thrown in there with a bunch of other units. Next we have Boreas. Boreas I'm going to put at A tier because it's just, once again, it's a better Wind Archer and it doesn't really have anything really super special going for it. But it does do a lot of damage. So if you pair it with something that increases damage, like let's say the Chemist, it's going to be doing insane amounts of damage, and it's going to be mowing through boards. My personal favorite is when I use Boreas along with Bruiser, and that's a great combination overall, and usually makes up for whatever the other lacks. So if the Bruiser isn't doing enough single target damage or just is on its cooldown, Boreas can make up for it, and etc, etc. Next we have the Demonologist. Now, it's honestly kind of a weird name why they call it the Demonologist. It's kind of creepy, but essentially what it does is when you merge it together, it spawns a monster on your opponent's side, and when that monster dies on your opponent's side, it gives you a ton of mana. I'm actually going to put it at the bottom of A tier because of this, because it's essentially it's basically a much better priestess if you think about it, because The Priestess, it gives you a ton of mana when it merges together, but the Demonologist also affects your opponent and makes them suffer, which gives you a better chance of winning. So it has an active effect when you merge, besides just giving you mana. But the mana that you get is delayed, as your opponent has to kill the minion. But if your opponent dies to the minion, then I mean, that's a win-win. So that's why I like it. That's why we put it in A. Hex. Now, Hex can have a huge potential to be amazing, or great, if not amazing. And I'm thinking I'm going to put it right here. High B, but not the best B. And the reason being is because Hex gives your minions, I think, at max mana power up and a tier 3, which is achievable. At max mana power up and at tier 3, you are given an extra 4.8% chance. So whatever's nearby it, not diagonally, but in a plus pattern. So whatever is nearby it in that plus pattern gets an extra 5% chance to kill whatever it's hitting, only for the mini minions, to instantly kill the mini minions pretty much in that radius and stuff like that. And so you might be asking, wait, a chance to instant kill to whatever it's next to? That sounds amazing. The downside is that that's all it gives. It doesn't help you with bosses in any way, shape, or form, or mini bosses. And because of that, I'm going to keep it at a B. But when it comes to helping like stuff like Boreas and the Wind Archer, and even Thunderer, it basically increases their area damage, their area damage, as it just helps them deal with massive amounts of minions much better. Now we got the Inquisitor. So the Inquisitor, I'm going to put top A. Do I want to put top A? If you can't tell, I'm kind of torn. I'm going to finish kind of explaining my reasoning on Inquisitor, and then I'm going to place her accordingly. But the Inquisitor, when there are 1, 4, 7, or 10 on the field, so kind of like 1 mod 3, if you're nerdy like me, 1 mod 3, when there's 1 mod 3 of them on the field, they will increase their damage they deal they'll increase the speed and deal area damage, I'm pretty sure, and every time they attack an opponent, their damage increases. So as they attack opponents, it's pretty much the same thing as Crystalmancer, in the sense that as it attacks the opponents, it increases its damage. It does have a damage cap, though, unlike Crystalmancer. Crystalmancer does not have a damage cap, at least not that I know of. But here's the reason why I'm putting it at an A is because of the conditions. Because just by getting 1 more or 1 less than what is required to meet those conditions of the 1, 4, 7, 10, it completely ruins your DPS. You just lose. If you cannot get rid of that, like, safely, you lose all DPS and you lose the game. But if you're able to build it right, set it up correctly, and you can get rid of extra minions when you see them, you win the game. Only like occasionally being beat out, or like it's kind of like a 50-50 chance, actually more like a 40-60 chance that you'll win against a cultist and a blade dancer, because these 3 are essentially like the meta, but because of how badly you can get screwed over by the Inquisitor, I'm going to put it at A. But it's going to be the highest A. I got Meteor. I'm not going to lie. I've tried to use Meteor in like a few decent decks, in like the old meta decks as well. But in just the current meta, with the Inquisitor, the Cultist, and the Blade Dancer, as well as Robot, I just don't really see a use for it. It's very hard to use Meteor because it does instant damage, not constant damage. It doesn't do reliable damage. It just does instant damage. So you gotta hope that you get him to merge him together, and then once you run out of merges, you don't do any damage. Unless you have Thunderer in the deck, which still doesn't do enough damage to really keep up, at least not nowadays. At least that when I tried to run this deck, or run Meteor in a deck, it just didn't work out great for me. So because of that, I'm going to put it at C. Because it does when the meteor works and it does crit, it does great amount of damage. But unless it crits, it's not good. So next on is the robots. So the robots I'm going to put behind the Inquisitor, and I'm not going to put it in S tier. Because the robot, though it is a meta-defining unit because it does so much damage, it takes a second to get there. So in order to get there, you have to merge, you have to use the robots in a merge 20 times. And you have to use it in a merge once in order to even make it do damage. And in order for it to really even start doing real damage, you have to merge it 5 times. And because of that requirement, it can be very difficult to win or to at least survive the early games. But in the late games, once you start hitting 10, 15, and 20 merges, the robot really starts to pick up pace and really starts to do the necessary damage needed for actually dealing decent amounts of damage. It also does area damage, increases crit rate, and all the such, but it takes a second for it to really get going, and the reason why I put it behind the Inquisitor is because the Inquisitor will pretty much win almost every single time if it has the same setup, as long as it has 4 decent units on field. The Inquisitor will out damage the robot almost every time, and that's including 9 robots on the field that are tier 2 or tier 3, because the robot does do good damage, but it's just kind of the lower tier of the top tier decks. But I would say it's probably in the top 5, top 4 best decks. And next we have Scrapper. Without a doubt, it's an S tier. It is what helps make the Inquisitor good. It helps make the Cultist good. It helps make the Dancer good. It helps make pretty much, if there's ever a time when you wish that unit didn't exist and you wish you could just transfer its tier onto another unit, that's what the Scrapper does. It eats whatever is the same tier as it, and it builds up material. Every 3 to 4 units, I think, every 3 to 4 units you eat, it will then give an extra tier randomly to something that's not a Scrapper. So that means it won't accidentally tier up a Scrapper, which is also great. The only time you can get it to tier up a Scrapper is if you use a Scrapper, eat something, and it sends the tier up jelly bean to another unit, and then in that time you then use another Scrapper to then eat that unit that was going to be tiered up, and then it ends up tearing up this Scrapper. That's the only way you could tier up the Scrapper. So basically, it's your choice if the Scrapper gets tiered up. Yeah, that's really the only downside. The only other downside is if you just get a bunch of it and you get really unlucky. It doesn't do any damage whatsoever. And also how much you end up relying on Scrapper in these games makes it also difficult for you to sometimes dig yourself out of a hole, because Scrapper accidentally puts you into that hole because it levels up, let's say, a Portal Keeper to tier 5, and you can't get rid of the Portal Keeper, and now it's in the middle of your board. And these are more specific scenarios, but as you play with the Scrapper, you start to notice these things more and more, but its versatility definitely deserves an S tier. Shaman. I hate this card, but it does deserve an A just because of how annoying it is. I'm going to put it mid-A because I feel like if I ran a deck, if I could find it, I think I got rid of it because I just got tired of playing it because it felt scummy playing it. I didn't like playing it. I just felt like a degenerate, honestly. But it did definitely win me the games because I would just destroy the opponent's boards without them ever having a chance to really get their stuff set up. And then I'm sitting over here with 10 bruisers on my board, because I'd usually do bruiser, shaman, I'd sometimes use demonologist, and then I do mime and Harley Quinn. And with that deck, I would just basically get a bunch of bruisers on my field, do so much damage, and then ruin the opponent's boards in the process. But you just feel bad playing it. So it's more like a moral standards is why it's at a mid A. But that's that. Chronos. I mean, it's like an inconsistent freeze. It's like an inconsistent ice mage, essentially. And because of that, I wouldn't say it's really worth using. I even tried to see if it like completely stops every single minion. It Stuff can still activate abilities inside. So like if you somehow stop a boss with it, I've still seen them activate it. They might change it later, but at least when I tried to use it, they would still bosses and mini bosses would still activate their abilities while inside. So I didn't find it useful at all. It's pretty much just a built different ice wizard, but done worse because it just randomly decides on the field where it's going to stop time. So sometimes it'll stop it at the best place possible. Other times it'll stop it in the worst place possible where it doesn't even matter. So that's my take on it. The Trapper, I would say, is probably... So finally we got to the Trapper, and I would say the Trapper is actually a B tier. And the reason why I'm going to put it in B tier, I'm going to put it ahead of Hex. The reason why I'm going to put it B tier is because right off the bat, as soon as you get onto the field, okay, every 6 seconds it will spawn a net, and that net works pretty much the same as Kronos's thing, but it slows down whatever's on it by 30%, which is pretty good, and you can actually stack that slow with like an ice. So if you do Frost and Trapper together, it does a lot of slow. And it also has, just right off the bat, and by the way, the armor destruction does not increase unless you level up the card itself, but the armor destruction is a 53% armor destruction, which is, and that's just off the bat, just as soon as you get at tier 1, which is arguably better than the Chemist. But the reason why I put the Chemist in A and the Trapper in a high B position is because the Trapper places its traps randomly. It doesn't always hit first minion like the Chemist does. But yeah, it does a great damage increase for all your units, as well as slowing the units, which can be helpful as well. But anyways, that is it for this tier list. I hope it helps anyone who's trying to start. If you've noticed, I think a good majority of the units are A and B tier in terms of versatility, and there's a couple of S tier units, and luckily a few of those S tier units you can get relatively early in the game, and like the Engineer and the Mime. And by the way, if you see any of the minions in S, A, and B tier, those are all very usable minions, very viable, and can bring you many, many victories. You could just make a deck purely out of B tier minions that I have here, and you would definitely still be able to win a good number of games. However, if you start using more A and S tier minions, you're more likely to win. You're just more likely to win. And but anyways, that's it for this tier list. I know it's very long. I just want to get all my thoughts out and have a definitive tier list. Yeah.